Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to Meet Menaca to celebrate you. Today, we are going to have another great guest to speak another important topic. He is Josh McLennon, a trainee intellectual property lawyer from London. He is going to be speaking about a young person's perspective of cross-cultural heritage. Before I hand it over to Josh, I am going to be just saying some housekeeping rules. Please keep yourself unmuted till we finish the live. Later on, when we ask you to ask questions, please feel free to either unmute yourself and ask your questions straight to Josh, or send the questions to Kirubai and she'll pass it on to me. On this platform, we don't speak anything about personal things unless and until the speaker feels free and willing to speak about it. And we generally don't touch anything about political, religious background. Thank you so much, everyone. A very warm welcome to everyone who is on the Zoom platform and everyone who has joined us from Facebook. A very warm welcome to you as well, Josh. Lovely to have you on this platform. Thank you so much.
No, honestly, thanks.
Josh is training to be an intellectual property lawyer in London. I just looked up the statistics around this topic. 677,000 people in the UK define themselves as mixed race people. However, the official statistics was taken in 2011. So we'll have to wait the accurate statistics to come out this year in 2021. But as per that statistics, 1.2% of the total population claims they are of mixed race descent. And out of that, in London, 22,327 people, which means 7.3% of our population in London is actually of mixed heritage. So it's high time we speak about it and listen to someone of their perspectives, how they feel, how comfortable they are, how others perceive them, and how they perceive themselves. So without further ado, let's get on to the show. Can I ask, Josh, why do you want to speak about this subject, first of all?
So I think for me, I'm really, really passionate about talking about kind of issues of identity, particularly in cross kind of cultural, people being of cross-cultural heritage, because I think that kind of in order for us to come together and hopefully change the world for the better, we need to be able to understand other people from different backgrounds and kind of recognize the similarities in our experiences and also the differences. So I guess coming from a cross-cultural background myself, you kind of have to bring these differences and similarities together when constructing your own identity. As a teenager, these are the things you kind of have to do yourself. It's not just between different people. So I'm not here today to say oh, it's all terrible, or oh, it's all fantastic. The reality is that identity is much more complicated than that. So I'm here to basically just kind of shed a light on what it's like to be mixed race. And of course, I only talk from my own experiences. Someone else with exactly the same background as me, with exactly the same parents, with exactly the same experiences growing up, might feel very, very differently about these things. So I can only talk about how I feel right now. And I hope that will be of great benefit to your viewers. So yeah, no, thank you for having me on. I really, really appreciate it.
A pleasure to have you, Josh. So I know you are both of African and European descent. Can you tell us a bit about how being of mixed heritage affected you while you growing up?
Of course, yeah, definitely. So just to give everyone a bit of background on my background. So both my parents are English. They're both born in England, both raised in England. So my dad is black. His parents are from Jamaica and the Seychelles. And my mum is white. And her parents are both of mixed English and Irish heritage. So through those together, I'm kind of a big mix of quite a wide range of things. So I grew up in the southeast of England, particularly just south of London. And yeah, I grew up, really relatively comfortable. I grew up in a nice kind of middle class village in Surrey. And I wouldn't say there's anything in particular which kind of marked us out as different from other families, my friends, for example, other than the fact that we were a mixed race family, right? So I kind of felt that racism was not something which really applied to me personally. I felt like it was something for maybe people in cities or people in America, for example, because I think that's the way it's often portrayed in the media. But yeah, personally, I guess one of these things is that it's no matter whether you believe in kind of racism or race as a concept, it still affects every single one of us throughout our growing up and throughout our lives, I guess. So I guess first off, it's probably best to say that I found it much easier to identify with my white heritage growing up, so my English and Irish sides. I think a big part of that is, I guess I've got a very British sounding name. I've maybe got a very British sounding accent, and both of these things might lead someone to say, that's a white name or that's a white accent. And so I didn't really feel any kind of incongruity there. I didn't feel like anything was odd or strange about that. So I guess my race didn't really have that much meaning for me. And, had I been brought up with an African name or I had a slightly different accent, then maybe, I might not have been so ready to identify as white growing up. So yeah, I guess I must have been about 7 years old when I had my first experience of overt racism, which I can actually remember. I was playing football for my local football club, and a boy I'd never met before in my life shouted at me. He said, "Oi, Blackie, pass the ball." And to be honest, I felt heartbroken. I felt ashamed. I felt like he was calling me a dog's name or something like that. And I guess these kind of there are a few little incidents like this which I kind of just swept under the carpet and said, oh, it doesn't matter. But the reality is that these things really do influence your identity growing up. So yeah, it must have been a year or two after that, where I remember being in class. So I was kept behind by a supply teacher, along with two other boys, for disrupting the class. I hold my hands up. I'm a complete chatterbox. As a child, I was non-stop talking. So, disrupting the class is something which I can say I was possibly doing. But the other two boys were the only two people in my class of African heritage, or at least of partial African heritage. And neither of them, both of them were very, very quiet children and were not disrupting or talking during that class at all. So even at, it must have been 10 or 11, I remember thinking there was something slightly odd about why they were also kept behind at the same time as me. And so I guess this kind of marked the beginning of me noticing that people might perceive me as being slightly different as on account of my heritage, but I wasn't sure exactly what that meant yet, to be honest with you. So, yeah. So I guess moving on to, I'd probably say it's the main incident of my adolescence. I was about 13 or 14. I just pretty much started secondary school, and I was on a school camping trip, just having fun with my friends, and one of them, inexplicably for no real reason, started calling me the N-word and shouting at me. And that for me was a kind of a real point where I started to see myself quite differently after that. So, I went straight to the teacher. I was crying my eyes out. And the boy was basically disciplined in exactly the same way, as if he had been caught swearing or something like that. There was no kind of real recognition that racist language and kind of referencing people's heritage in slurs and insults is very different to swearing, because it can have real impacts on how people view themselves.
Sure.
Yeah, so I guess that kind of left me thinking, like maybe maybe pointing out my blackness was the offensive part, and not necessarily the way in which it was done. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you, so, Josh. It was really interesting to listen to you saying you identified yourself a bit more British and definitely white till up to an age, till that incident happened. And then you suddenly dawned on you that something was different about you.
Yeah, maybe I'm not white.
Yeah. So how both you and the society in general view your heritage, in your opinion?
So I guess people, people in general are very, very interested and curious, I think, about people's backgrounds in general, particularly mixed heritage. And that can be both good and bad, So on one hand, it's really nice to have people interested in who you are, where you're from, maybe your family history, and that can, once you kind of open that conversation, you can really get to know people really quite well. But on the other hand, I remember having plenty of incidences growing up and when I was at university, where people would ask me, "Oh, where are you from?" I'd say Southeast England. They'd say, "No, where are you really from?" And I'm sure this is familiar with a lot of people will be familiar with that question in particular. But I found that when I was kind of constructing my identity and trying to figure out who I was, when people were saying, where are you really from, as if I'm not British, as if I'm not English, that was something which was really hard to swallow. So I guess, the people's interest is a real important part of how society views heritage. But also people have really terrible stereotypes about people from mixed race backgrounds. Particularly, I feel personally that my black side, to some degree, gets a really bad rap in the media and kind of culture in general. So that the way it kind of manifested itself in my actual day-to-day life was, at parties, when just relaxing in the park with my friends, people would often approach us asking if I knew where to buy certain drugs and things like that. And that really, I guess I found quite difficult. My white friends were never asked. I could never really understand, was it something about the way I dressed which made me look dodgy, or were people just expecting me to be more likely to take certain drugs? I don't know. And that's something I found quite difficult. But I guess it's very difficult to tell whether someone treats you differently as a result of your race, or one of the million other things about you.
Thanks, Josh. You mentioned when you started off, you mentioned there are positives and negatives. So what are the positives of being Miss Heritage?
So number one, I also find it really interesting. I find it really nice to be able to kind of look back at my family history, talk to my grandparents about where they come from and the kind of the different lives which they led before they came to Britain. That's something which I really, really like. And also talking to my grandparents who were born and raised in Britain, to kind of see that two sides of history in some way, I find really quite valuable. Particularly, I guess Britain is, of course, it had its colonies, and to kind of see the British Empire played out in, I'm a product of it, even though it's not around today. I find that really quite interesting. So that's one of the positives. Another positive is that it definitely allows you to kind of get to know people maybe a little easier. I think because people find it very difficult to put you in one particular box, so people might not. They might, because they don't know how to do that. That it can often be easier to break certain boundaries and break certain barriers, and that can be really, really nice. That's another real benefit. But in terms of the negatives, I think it can be really hard when you don't have the tools or the knowledge to kind of go against these cultural stereotypes. You often feel that it's only you. It's only you because you don't feel like I didn't feel like I fitted neatly into being white. I didn't feel like I fitted neatly into being black. I've kind of felt like neither of those experiences and the culture surrounding them applied to me. So I kind of felt a bit in between, I guess. And that's something which, as I've gotten older, I've kind of begun to integrate the two sides.
Sure. Josh, generally there are assumptions, as you rightly pointed out. Yes, asking about certain questions because you're from a different heritage or a particular heritage is very common. On the other side, like there is, like for example, a lot of my friends, Caucasian friends in particular, they would say, "Oh, your daughter or you must be very good in mathematics because you're from Asia, or you must be academical because you're from Asia." Do you think there are any connections like that for you as well?
Certainly, yeah, absolutely. I think a big one is to do with sport. So people assume that either being mixed race or having African heritage means that you excel in certain sports, for example, sprinting or long distance running or basketball or maybe even football to some degree. And with that, that can be nice, people assuming that you're good at things, but with that comes a lot of pressure, particularly when maybe you've never played that sport before. So yeah, those kind of, even the positive stereotypes can be constricting in some way because they prescribed certain behavior for you. You must act in a certain way based on your DNA, which is just ridiculous. And I think that we need to be really careful when we categorize people to allow them to be able to express themselves and feel comfortable regardless of whether they're good at certain sports or excel in certain subjects.
Sure. Thank you, Josh. It was very insightful. So we have spoken about your perspective, about how others perceived you. How has your awareness of your heritage affected your relationship with friends and family in the immediate circle?
Yeah. So I guess it's also important to say that most of my close friends, it's only thinking about it over the past week, are also of mixed backgrounds. Even my friends who other people may look at them and assume that they're white are maybe half English, half of Jewish heritage, for example, like my best friend. And so I guess my friends have always been aware of kind of race issues and difficulties of fitting neatly into certain categories. And so I guess there's a real sense of camaraderie in there. I've been really touched, to be honest, particularly last year with the killing of George Floyd in America, just how proactive and committed my friends were to kind of making real changes. That's something which really moved me. So I guess as my awareness of coming from a mixed heritage is coming more and more to the fore, rather than just identifying with just one, for example, being white or the other just being black, that's really allowed me to get really close to my friends. In terms of my family, that's a little bit more complicated because, I guess growing up, I found it really hard to talk to my parents openly about the difficulties of race. So, for example, because my mum's white, I felt that she would never understand, what it's like to grow up as a mixed race young person in Britain. But as I kind of have gotten older and felt more comfortable discussing these things, it's really brought us closer in a lot of ways, because of course she is a white person, but she also has mixed race children. She has a black husband. She has had certain racist incidents which have also happened to her as a result of my family heritage. So it's not as if my family, regardless of which side they are from, are unaffected by my mixed race heritage. So I feel definitely as time goes on, as you kind of feel more comfortable discussing these things, it's that open discussion which really allows you to get closer with your friends and family.
Sure. Thank you so much for that insight, Josh. So how has your heritage affected your education and career? Because you're quite a young adult still. At least for us, you're still young. So, so how has it affected your education and career?
So, in terms of my education, I would say a big part where it did affect me was in particular in relation to sports. So, you know, at my secondary schools, being part of sports teams was a really important part of school life. And so, you know, having that preferential treatment to some degree was beneficial. You know, it allowed me to play in certain teams and get to know other people from my year and things like that. That was nice. But of course, you know, as I said, the pressure can really be, it can feel quite a lot sometimes, to be honest with you. But yeah, I guess I also want to say that my school was not particularly open to my hairstyle, for example. So when I was, I think about 14, 15, something like that, I decided for some reason to grow relatively short dreadlocks, probably about this big. I thought it looked cool at the time. But my school were very quick to clamp down on that and say, you know, you must be smart, you must make sure that you're not messy. Whereas, you know, my friends who were white, who had straighter hair, you know, their hair was 3 or 4 times the length of mine, yet I was the one being singled out. So I guess it made me feel that the school system was kind of against me or against people like me. And so, yeah, I mean, from then on, I think that affected me because I felt that the only way for my hair to be smart was if it was basically all cut off. So yeah, so I'm making a conscious effort to grow this, see how far it's going to go. So yeah, I guess in terms of my education, in that way, I think, you know, we talked a little bit about it before, Menaca, but at school, I think as a result of being from a minority ethnic background, I really felt a lot of pressure to just absolutely, you know, I felt that I had incredible opportunity, which my ancestors did never have. They would have loved to have done it. So it's time for me to make sure that I absolutely smash every single exam, which I take. And that is, you know, of course, that can be beneficial because it means that you might excel, but also it can come at a real cost, a real personal cost, because you end up burning out more often. I guess that kind of ties into career as well. You know, as you said, I work for a law firm in London. I'm the only attorney of any African heritage whatsoever. And so I feel a real pressure in that sense as well to kind of do my best and prove that, you know, people like me are just as good as the others. And that can come at a real personal cost. Yeah.
Sure. I can totally relate to it. I used to be training dentist and I still hold a practice. And the conversation will be flowing like any other conversation. But the moment they get to know I have migrated from Sri Lanka, India, educated in India, originally from Sri Lanka, the first sentence you usually hear is, haven't you done very well for yourself? And perhaps that was a compliment from their side. I'm not judging, but I perceived it as, you know, they're questioning my credibility. And so, as you rightly said, I would put long hours, work so much harder, go after certificate after the certificate to prove a point that I was good enough to be training, or I was good enough to hold the position, or I was good enough to, you know, do a presentation. So I think I totally relate to you in that it does put a lot of pressure on someone to, you know, make sure that we are on par, whether it has been said with an intention of that or not. So I think it is really great to bring awareness of these topics. So thank you, Josh. And I'm glad that you started this young to bring that awareness.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. I'd also like to say a little bit about, you know, the positive side to my career of my heritage. You know, I think at the moment there's a big push for diversity and inclusion in companies, particularly throughout the Western world. I'm not sure about the rest, but you know, I think that coming from a minority ethnic background might give you a platform in some way. I think people might listen to you more, particularly when it comes to issues of race and diversity. And my firm in particular is very open to me writing articles on these topics and things like that. So I think that in some ways it's allowed me to kind of raise my profile maybe in my industry more than if I was part of the majority, you know, being totally white, I guess.
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Josh, because I did write an article once saying lost in translation. So we have to make sure we are not lost in translation, and we should help other people not to get lost in the translation, right? So it's great
Yeah.
that you're doing that. So, always in life, we learn from our difficulties. At least that has been my experience, and I've seen other people learning from their experience. And, they say, you get lemons, you make lemonade out of it. So how have you
Yeah, yeah,
dealt?
yeah.
So how have you dealt with problems resulting from your heritage so far?
So I guess number one is knowledge, and knowledge is I think the most important kind of tool in your toolkit against these kind of problems of society. So particularly when I was a teenager, I found it pretty difficult to kind of disprove the assumptions which people had made about me in terms of my race. So I then basically embarked on a huge journey of reading whatever books I could on these topics, and that is something which number one, it made me feel much more comfortable in myself that it's not a black person's failing as a result of them being black. It's often this huge structural issues like child poverty and things like that, which cause certain outcomes. So I guess knowledge is number one, and reading books. That's been the number one way which I guess I've dealt with my problems. Number two is that I think in the face of kind of these big societal things, the way that society views you, it's easy to feel powerless and helpless. So to take I think it's really important to begin to take agency over what you can. So do what you can to help other people in those certain situations. So this year, I think I started back in October. I started tutoring a young man from London in his AS levels through a charity called the Access Project, and that for me has been so important because it feels like I'm kind of giving back and really kind of living my life in the way that I want to, and that has been really, I guess, important for me for accepting who I am, and I guess using my privileged position in order to help other people. So that's been quite nice. But number three actually is being open and honest, not only with yourself but with other people. So when I was younger, I found it very difficult to talk about these things. I felt that, if I admitted that, it upset me sometimes when people asked me where I was really from, then I was kind of failing in some sort of way and that I should just ignore it. But, I think in order to deal with these problems, you have to recognize them, and that sometimes takes courage. But talking with friends and family about these kind of issues and problems which you're having that is so important. And of course, if you are really, really struggling, seek professional help. And that, these are the things which I
Sure,
think
yeah.
can be really helpful.
Great advice, because I know I have been there myself. I have had mental health issues. I have had relationship issues, and you try to mask it and try to pretend everything is okay, and it
Yes,
puts
yeah,
additional pressure on yourself, right? So I
yeah,
think
yeah,
it's great advice to say that everybody should embrace and be authentic and live your life as you want to live. Bottom line, I think.
yeah,
Be
yeah,
proud of who you are, right, Josh?
yeah, exactly. Totally. I think the shame and stigma which comes associated with, feeling bad about certain issues is totally unnecessary and totally gets in the way. So the sooner we can do away with that, the better. So yeah, honestly, this talk show, for example, is a great example of that, of making sure that these issues are raised and people understand that it's not shameful to talk about it.
Sure.
So thank
Thank
you.
you so, thank you so much for volunteering to speak about this. I know these journeys are never easy, and we all have
Yeah.
some help from someone along the way to get where we are today from where we were. So, what kind of help or support have you got to be on this platform at the age of 25 and to be able to speak so wisely about this subject?
I'm not too sure about the wisely part, but thank you. I think number one, I mean, my parents. My parents are an absolute bedrock of my life, and it's only really been in the past few years where I've started to really use them as a resource in some ways, and not be afraid to talk to them about these issues. The level of understanding and love which they've given me unconditionally has definitely, it's something I appreciate every single day. That's something which means a lot to me. So yeah, I would definitely say that my parents are number one in terms of the support which I've had. Also, so I studied at the University of Leeds in the north of England. And both my parents are actually from the north of England, and all of my grandparents still live there. So when I was at university, it meant that I could visit my grandparents, once a month or sometimes twice a month, have Sunday dinner, and just talk about, who we are and where we've come from, and kind of little anecdotes of their parents and their grandparents, people who were born, over 100 years ago. To kind of have that real understanding of my background and my heritage has no doubt made me feel a lot more comfortable in my own skin. And so, I think those, like I said, they're both family. Family is just, been a real great support for me.
Thank you so much. I'm glad that you had that support system around you to be able to, transform into who you are today. So I'm sure a lot of young people today are perhaps feeling something similar, and there are a lot of people who would benefit from, your insights or your experiences to, grow into who you are today. So what would be your advice for a young person in a similar situation, Josh?
So what I wish someone told me when I was 13, 14, is that there's nothing odd about you or weird or strange. We're all different, of course. But coming from a mixed background does not mean that you do not fit anywhere, and that you're in between the cracks. That is just not the case. You are a whole, complete human being with a complicated history, just as all of us. And if there are things which you don't understand, or that you wish other people understood more, do not be afraid to go to Google. Google certain, any question which you have with regard to your heritage, Google is your friend. And, through that, you can get access to books and things like that. And I feel like, books for me have been, as I said before, a real source of information and important knowledge for me. So, do not be afraid to access that. There are many people who have tread this path before. It's not that mixed race people are now only new now. People have been mixing throughout the whole of human history, and there's plenty of information out there.
That's great. So we have taken you through the entire journey from childhood, how you felt that you were mainly British white, and then you wake up to the reality and how you perceive things, and you have come a long way now, coming to terms and accepting who you are and seeing the strength in it, right? So what can anyone around that person can do to help them?
Yeah. So in terms of, if you're looking to be an ally in these kind of situations, I think, it's really important to give people, if you can't provide that information yourself, and of course, I don't expect anyone to know exactly what to say in difficult circumstances, particularly when it comes to someone's heritage, which is so personal. I think it's about providing the tools to the person, in the sense that, if you hear about, if you listen to a really good podcast or something like that, which you think would be informative for that person, don't be afraid to share it. Don't be afraid, to ask people, has coming from a mixed mixed background affected you growing up? You know, what are your experiences? I'd like to learn more. Yeah, you know, I think number one, yeah, providing signposts to important information and good information, so podcasts, books, even music albums, for example, that can also be really helpful. I'd say those are the main things. And you know, you can't be expected to know absolutely everything. Loving, considerate support is sometimes all you can offer, and that goes a long way. So yeah, I'd also say that.
Sure. Thanks, Josh. One last question before I wrap it up. You know, we have spoken about, you know, individually what you have contributed, how other people have contributed, and extended families can contribute. What about society in general? What can they do to bring awareness to this subject and, you know, help these people come to terms with it and grow as, for example, like you did?
I think number one is not being afraid to talk about these issues and discuss these issues out in the open. I feel, particularly in Britain, we kind of pretend that racism doesn't exist here, and that it's a solely American thing. And that is something which, you know, I can say from my own experience, and I'm sure many other people have the experience, that is just not the case. And so, yeah, I feel like we need to accept that, you know, even us ourselves. So for example, I remember being 14, 15, walking down my road at home, and there was another black boy, probably similar age to me, wearing a hoodie, walking towards me on my side of the road. And I did feel scared, and I did feel worried. And so I did cross the road, you know, and that's despite me looking in the mirror every single day and seeing someone of African heritage, you know. So I don't blame anyone for having these kind of preconceptions about certain groups of people. We can't change our past. We can't change the information which we had when we were growing up. But what we can change is what we do going forwards. And in order to do that, I think you need lots of valuable information coming from the people themselves. And that will help shape it going forward. But yeah, I think just being honest about where you are with yourself, you know, denying it is just not going to help.
Thank you, Josh. It was a pleasure asking you questions. So hold on.
Thank you.
People who are on Zoom, please hold on. And on Facebook, we are not yet finished. So we will be asking some questions and going through the questions and answer sessions. Is there any parting word you want to say something, or shall I go to the question straight, Josh?
My parting word is, I hope today I've given you an insight into what it's like to be someone of mixed race background. It's not always easy. It's not always complicated. Some people, for example, don't like the word mixed race. Some people use it to identify themselves, you know, so things are never simple, but do not let that stop you from accessing information and being curious about the subject, because, you know, going forwards, if you're not mixed race yourself, you know, maybe your grandchildren might be. You just don't know. I imagine my grandparents, it never crossed their minds that they'd have a mixed race grandchild. So yeah, I guess just thank you, number one, to you, Menaca, for setting this all up. I think it's so important to talk about these things, and I hope I've maybe demystified and made it a little clearer what it's actually like to be of mixed race heritage in Britain. But yeah, no, any questions are welcome, and thank you.
Before going to the questions itself, following tradition, I'm going to announce what we are going to talk about next week, Saturday. It is going to be International Women's Day on the 8th of March. So in response to that, we are going to be having our own Women's International Day. We are going to be having 4 speakers on our panel. First speaker is Julie Tushingham. She is a reputation and business coach. And then it is Devapriya Khanna from India. She's a brand strategist. And Claudette Brown, she's a success coach. And then Dr. Uma Devi, who is an assistant professor of biochemistry from Malaysia. So we are going to be speaking about women empowerment in large, but with different perspective from 4 different speakers. Before we go into the questions, let me hand it over to Kirbai to give the vote of thanks. Over to you, Kirbai.
Thank you once again for all those who are viewing from Facebook and on this platform, Meet Menaca, celebrating you. Today we celebrate Josh, who has so candidly, honestly, and openly shared his challenges and how he, in his own way, with the help of friends and family, overcame and overcoming. I think it is a journey of overcoming this stigma. And Josh, we want to thank you, Josh, for helping many other young people and people sometimes like me who come from a different country might not understand the seriousness of this. And thank you, Josh. And I pray that you will, this journey, as you have started, I think you will even write books on this and help many people. Thank you once again.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
And thank you once again, Josh. All the best.
Thank you, Kirbai. Thank you, Josh. The first question to you is, have you had any difficulty fitting in with Black people? Or Afro-Caribbean background is the right word. I'm sorry, I just read the question as it was.
No. Some people identify themselves as Black people, some people as Afro-Caribbean. It depends. So I would say yes, but that is not as a result of, I'd say that's because, where I grew up was mainly white. I didn't really know many Black people growing up. And the only Black people who I did know were those two boys in my class, right? So I'd say that for me was tricky. I think I also, when I was younger, associated Blackness with maybe being cool or maybe being, maybe being a Londoner, for example. And those are things which I couldn't really identify with. So I think, obviously that is wrong. Black people are in all parts of our society here in Britain. And yeah, I would say to some degree, I felt like my experience as a Black person was relatively inauthentic. I didn't feel like an authentic Black person because, I've been very privileged in the life which I've had so far. And I think that is also, as I've come to terms with that and, understood that my experience as a Black person is just as valuable and just as representative as anyone else's experience. I think has allowed me to get closer to other people. But I'd also like to say that my Black friends and Black people who I met at university have always been extremely welcoming, and that's something which I just really, really appreciate. I guess often these things play out in our own heads and not necessarily out in the world. So yeah, I'd say in some ways, yes, it has been difficult, but in others, I feel like I've turned a corner. So yeah.
Sure. Okay. So expanding on that, how was it to fit into the white background or Caucasian background?
Yeah. So I'd say with regards to that, because I look different, and people don't necessarily assume that I am white, that in some ways made it easier for me because I never really felt the need to be, a real part of it in the same way. I kind of knew that I would never be able to be part of it as a white person might. So that, I guess, was fraught with maybe less distress. I felt less pressure to conform in that way.
Sure. Okay.
But yeah.
Sure. There's another question. Josh, could you please elaborate on this matter? You obviously look more Black or Afro-Caribbean descent, and than white. So how do you handle it? Is it difficult?
Yeah. So that's a really lovely question in a lot of ways. It's very thoughtful. So I have 3 other siblings. One sister in particular looks very similar to me, has much darker skin than me. Well, dark skin, just like me. Whereas my brother and my other sister have much lighter skin. and you know, could often pass as white. So I guess, you know, there is variation in all different areas. You know, it's not that all mixed race people have exactly the same skin tone. So, I mean, that's one thing, but also, I guess in terms of race, there are many different kind of physiological factors which are important. So it's not just skin tone. It's also, you know, certain facial features, the hair type that you've got, for example. And so I have generally pretty dark skin. I, of course, have Afro-textured hair. You can see that. But maybe my eyes and my nose, for example, are very similar to my mum's. Whereas my lips are very similar to my dad. So, yeah, I guess it's what I want to say is that in some ways I look white, and in some ways I have European features, and in other ways I have African features. And you know, depending, you know, when I was younger, for example, when I was much younger and I identified mainly as white, I think I saw mainly my European features. And then when I identified as Black, I think I saw mainly my African features, whereas, of course, I'm a mixture of the two. And it's important to bring those both together when, you know, assessing whether someone looks as if they're
Sure.
from a certain race or not.
Sure. And there are a few questions coming through. So you received much criticism or, you know, not so good remarks, I guess, in a way, when you were young, and surely you did get hurt. How did you handle your feelings at that time?
So at the time, I did what I imagine most kids do, and I just thought that it didn't matter. I really felt like I couldn't talk to my parents about these things. I was, you know, utterly ashamed. I felt like I had done something, or that, you know, if I complained that someone said I was Black, you know, how would my dad feel about that? If I said, oh, someone said I was Black and felt upset about that, of course he's Black. This is, you know, so generally I felt very uncomfortable talking about it to other people, and I just tried to ignore it. Yeah, I think it was only kind of early in recent years, really, you know, being at university, I think it just happens as you grow older. You start to understand that there are many different sides to this. Yeah.
The next question to you from audience is, when you did tell your parents at the end that you did have difficulties with this mixed heritage and the consequences of it, how did they react? And secondly, how did they support?
So number one is that they reacted extremely positively, and I guess the main reason why I didn't want to bring it up to them was because I didn't want them to feel like they failed me, because they had no idea about how I felt about these things often. You know, how can they be expected to support me in ways which I didn't ask for or they couldn't notice? Yeah, so when I did finally open up to them, I made sure to do it in a relatively constructive way. You know, I made it very clear from the outset that, you know, this is not on you. You know, I just didn't feel comfortable talking about this at the time. And they were extremely open with me. I think they talked a little bit more about their own experiences as a mixed race couple in the north of England in what was the 1980s and 1990s. I think that was difficult in some respects, but to kind of open that discussion was absolutely invaluable. And I feel much more comfortable talking to my parents about this. So the way in which they supported me in particular is that, you know, every now and then, you know, if we're sitting around the family table, for example, obviously it's more difficult during COVID, you know, they will say, you know, how are you feeling? You know, if you thought about, you know, how do you feel about certain aspects of your heritage? Or maybe I think we talk a lot more about where we come from. So my dad will talk more about, you know, for example, his mum's upbringing in the Seychelles. He'll kind of bring a lot more stories like that into it.
Sure.
Because I guess they know that me myself, I'm very curious about my past, and I think that, yeah, talking to them openly about that definitely helped in that respect.
Sure. I think for sure, listening to you and what I know, the little I know, I guess, is we have come a long way for sure, isn't it? You know,
Yeah.
we have even seen baby Archie in the royal family, so we have definitely come a
Yeah,
long
yeah.
way. There you go. You are popular today. So there's another question already. If you don't have parental support, how would you have handled these difficulties and painful feelings?
Yeah. So I think number one is, you know, Google, and I think I think it's really important to just see that you're not alone and see that other people also have these problems. And you know, there'll be many people with lots of different solutions as to what they did, which could help, and some of them will apply to you, and some of them won't. Of course, not everyone has a supportive family background. So yeah, I would say Google is your friend again in these kind of situations. It's really, really important. But if you don't have that family support and you don't find anything on Google, you know, I think talk to your friends, whether, you know, for example, if you're in school still, maybe talk to your teachers who might come from a similar background to you or who might not. I think the most important thing is that they're compassionate people and are willing to understand where you're coming from. And they'll be able to signpost you in the right direction if you need that. So what I'd say is reach out, you know, number one, to the internet to see if you can find certain charities which might help in these kind of instances. Or number two is also, yeah, people of authority in your life and also your friends.
Thank you, Josh. I don't know about anybody else. I have definitely gained a lot of insight and different perspective of being mixed heritage.
Oh, thank you.
I wouldn't say I know many people of mixed heritage, really. So it is insightful, like Kiribe rightly pointed out. This is something everyone should be aware of. And, you know, it is apparently, I was just doing some research. It says it is apparently the fastest growing population, children of mixed heritage. So, you know, it's time for us to embrace and learn about them and see how we can support and grow as a society together. So I'm glad that you were able to speak about this subject today. For people who are on Zoom, please hold on. You're going to be able to ask more questions to Josh in a minute in a bit more informal way. I call it the after party, but it is Q&A and networking after the thing. So hold on to that. People who are in Facebook listening to us, thank you so much for joining. It is that time of the day to say goodbye. Until then, be happy, stay safe, and keep smiling.